And hello, welcome back. I'm your host, James O'Brien. This is the College Drive on Stream City Radio and Stream City Sports on YouTube. So this is our first edition of Stream City Sports. Kind of raw. It'll get a little bit better, I would hope, as we go along. Probably work on our lighting a little bit, but it's wanted to get the first one up and out and get it going. And we are talking about why the group of 4, 5, 6 the group is not ruining the college playoff. Why it's really not that much different when you add more power teams to it. And we kind of talked about that in the first part of the show. Now we're going to dig in and give you some of the direct comparison, talk the real numbers, go through the different years of the playoff, and we'll start with this year, simply because we're in the middle of it and that's what everybody's complaining about. And we kind of started to break this down earlier, but it's a situation where you had, yes, James Madison lost by 17, Tulane lost by 31, and but you turn around, you had Texas Tech lost by 23, Oregon lost by 34, Alabama lost by 35. Then you look at the remaining games. You had Georgia, Ole Miss, they both lost by less than a touchdown. Those are great games. Anytime you have that happen, that's a great game. Oklahoma and Ohio State lost by 10. Still really good games. Not weighed in the balance, in the final moments of the ball game, but nevertheless, very competitive football games. So basically, you're left with a situation where you had three really, and I left Miami and Ole Miss out of that. Another great game. You had 3 great games. You had 2 good games, and you had a couple blowouts and a couple beatdowns. So it's about 50-50 this year. How does that compare to other years? Because everybody acts like this is some outlier, that we've never seen football this bad in the history of the sport. Well, let's go back to last year when we had, and of course people complained about that as well, but it is a new system. It is not a system that's based on earning anything, so you're going to have some silly ideas that have to work their way out. And, one of them was that we're going to take the top 4 conference champs and give them an automatic bid, which on the surface doesn't sound like a bad idea, but all conferences aren't created equally. So that created the mass wringing of hands, and oh my God, we're putting the wrong teams at home, and okay, whatever. So they tweaked that out of it. And we end up with, now this year, because the ACC doesn't know how to work a tiebreaker, we end up, or they have a tiebreaker that is not geared towards this phony tournament that we enjoy every year. So we end up with 2 teams from a group of 5. And so that was a major problem. Okay, but how does that really compare? I mean, when you look at last year, you had Penn State handles Boise State, 17-point victory in that one. So Penn State moved on. You had Texas beating Arizona State by 8, a good game. You had Ohio State beating up on Oregon by 20 points. Oh, by the way, worse than Boise State lost by. You had Notre Dame and, I jumped way ahead. Notre Dame and Georgia. That was a 13-point ball game. So another good game. The first round you had Notre Dame beating Indiana by 10. That would qualify as a good game. Penn State beat the crap out of SMU by 28. You had Texas beating Clemson in what was a 14-point game, but it was a good game, and kind of your average football game. Nothing great, but a very watchable and enjoyable football game. And then you had Ohio State beating up on Tennessee. So, once again, these are not group of 5 teams that are getting beat up on. And then you get into the semis. It's Notre Dame beating Penn State by 3. Was a fantastic ball game. And then Ohio State and Texas, which was a really good ball game. Ends up a 14-point victory for Ohio State, but really was a much closer ball game than that. And then the national championship game, another good but not great ball game, as Ohio State gets 11-point victory in that one. So how does that shake out? How, when you look at the how does that compare to this year? We had one great game. Okay, you've had 3 already this year. You had 6 really good, solid games and 4 blowouts. So you had now you didn't have any of the absolute just beatdowns that you've had this year. So yeah, last year was a little bit better, but it wasn't necessarily because you had one more group of 5 team in there. I think that was a negligible difference in the overall scheme of it. So very comparable to what you had this year. A lot more solid games, not as many of those last minute, just really great games. We've had 3 of them. I don't know that we're going to get that in the championship game this year. I think we're going to have a good game in the championship, but I don't know that it's going to be a great game. A lot of that just depends on, frankly, how does Carson Beck play and how does Miami protect him? So if they can protect him, I think the defensive line for Miami has enough there to make it interesting. All right, we started this thing back in 14. And granted, now in 14, you didn't have anybody who'd ever played in this thing before. So that part kind of goes out the window. But you had Oregon beating Florida State by 39. Alabama lost to Ohio State by 7. We all know that game was not that close. And then you had Ohio State winning by 22 over Oregon. So you had one good game in the Ohio State-Alabama ball game. And then you had 2 blowouts. So not the best start in the world. And what would that have done compared to the old 2 teams in deal? Well, you ended up with number 2 playing number 4. So you would have had the other matchup would have given us Oregon against Alabama. So the team that won it wouldn't even been involved. And maybe shouldn't have been. I don't think they played for their conference title that year. But that's for another show. Another way we could fix the playoff. 15, you had the Clemson-Oklahoma game. Was a bit of a blowout, 20-point win for the Tigers. And that one, Alabama just destroyed Michigan State 38-0. And then the Alabama-Clemson game was a phenomenal championship game with a 5-point victory for Alabama. And so you had one great game, a blowout, and a beatdown. So 1 out of 3 were really watchable football games that you could really enjoy if you weren't a fan of a team or a conference. Then you jump ahead to the following year, 2016, and this one you end up with Alabama-Washington was an uncompelling ball game. It ended up being a 17-point victory for Alabama. Wasn't really a blowout, but was not really ever that competitive either. So not a great one there. Clemson shuts out Ohio State 31-0. And then Clemson beats Alabama in another fantastic matchup between those two, a 4-point victory this time for Clemson, as you had a blowout, a beatdown, and a great game. 2017, maybe one of the better, maybe the best. We're going to rank them at the end of the show. But this one, you had an all-time historic great, one of the best ball games we've had in the playoff era between Georgia and Oklahoma as Georgia comes back and wins that thing in 2 overtimes. Alabama-Clemson was not close. 24-6, Clemson never really challenged them. But that set up another fantastic, historically good game between Alabama and Georgia, where Alabama wins it in overtime, 26-23, the final in that one. So you had 2 historically great games. Two of probably the best 5 games in the entire playoff era, both happening in this year. And, and then you get not really a blowout, but a very lopsided win. Kind of the average ho-hum, not anything great, but you could watch it. A watchable football game in the Clemson-Alabama game. In 2018, it wasn't great. You had Clemson beat Notre Dame by 27, so you get a blowout there. Alabama beats Oklahoma by 11. Really wasn't that close, but that was the best game of this set because Clemson came back and blew Alabama out 44-16. So you end up with two blowouts in an average game at best between Alabama and Oklahoma in the Orange Bowl in 2018. 2019, you've got LSU that was just really good. I mean, no other way to put it. They come out and just destroy Oklahoma 63-28 in the opening game. In the Peach Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl is a really good game between Clemson and Ohio State this time, 29-23, a victory for Clemson. And it's LSU then blowing out Clemson 42-25, the final in that ball game. So you end up with a situation where you've got two blowouts or a great game, a lopsided game, and a beatdown. So you're kind of one to the positive, one to the negative, and one that just kind of falls in the middle somewhere in those ball games. Then you go to the 2019 season. I'm sorry, that was the 2019 season. 2020. And this was COVID, and it was horrible. It was, I think, without much of a stretch, the worst season we've had for the playoffs. You had Alabama beating up on Notre Dame 31-14. You had Ohio State beating up on Clemson 49-28. And then you have Alabama destroying Ohio State in the national championship game 52-24. Three blowouts. None of them were compelling football games at the end. And those are all name brands. And some of the biggest, probably three of the five biggest name brands in college football involved. And yet, not a great playoff. 2021, Alabama beats up on Cincinnati 27-6. Georgia destroys Michigan 34-11. And then you have a really good championship game in Georgia over Alabama 33-18. So you end up with one good and two blowouts. So, and yeah, you get one group of six. Really wasn't seeming to make a big difference. Then we move on to 2022, where you once again had a couple. These weren't overtime, but these are probably two of the five best games played in the college football playoff era. In TCU, Michigan was a back and forth and just a fantastic watch. And then Georgia and Ohio State, where Ohio State misses a field goal that sails wide left at the stroke of midnight. And then, unfortunately, if you're anything but a Georgia fan, you had a historically bad beatdown of TCU against Georgia. And, you had people saying, well, they didn't belong there. Yeah, they did. They earned it. They belonged in the football game. They played the way they needed Georgia to play for them to have a shot to beat Georgia. So, if you weren't a Georgia fan, it was terrible. You probably turned the thing off by halfway through the second quarter. But if you're a Georgia fan, you probably enjoyed it a lot. So once again, you get for my taste, two of the five best games in the playoffs in those two semifinal games. Unfortunately, you got the worst championship game ever. And then you come back in 23. And you have another great football game, probably another one of the top five in Michigan, Alabama, where Michigan wins in overtime 27-20, followed by a Washington-Texas game. It was a 6-point victory for Washington, another fantastic football game. And then you got a game that was closer than the score would indicate, the 34-13. I don't know that you ever really felt like Washington was going to win that football game, but it's just one of those. It wasn't, you look at it and you go, 21-point victory. It didn't really feel like that when you were watching it. It was a better game maybe than what we might have thought. So you had two great games and one blowout, and then we kind of covered 2024, one great game, six good games, and four blowouts. So where does that bring us? I mean, it's kind of, I think we can rightfully say we don't get a lot of great games. How does it really look when you look at it in the overall picture of it? When you look at teams that have played their first time out, what are the outcomes for teams that come in there the first time? Because everybody wants to throw shade at the group of five and tell you they don't belong, that they're ruining our playoffs. Well, really, are they? Let's look at it. Oregon's first appearance, they win by 39. That was the first year of it. So kind of got to throw that one out. LSU wins by 35, their first outing. Ole Miss wins by 31, their first outing, but against another team making their first appearance. Clemson wins by 20. Penn State wins by 17, another team playing somebody who had never played before in it. Miami wins by 10, another team, Miami wins by 10. Ohio State won their first appearance by 7, but it was the first year. Georgia won their first appearance by 6. TCU won their first appearance by 6. That's everybody who won their first appearance. From there, it's all losses. Texas, a 6-point loss. Alabama, a 7-point loss. Arizona and Alabama's was first year in. Arizona State lost by 8. Indiana by 10. Washington by 17. Boise State by 17. James Madison by 17. Oklahoma by 20. Cincinnati by 21. Michigan by 23. Texas Tech by 23. Tennessee by 25. Notre Dame by 27. Tulane by 31. Michigan by 38. Florida State by 39. So of the 25 teams making their first appearance, 16 of them lost. So 13 out of 16 lost their first appearance, and 81% of those teams, or that's 81%. Of the 25 teams that have played in the playoffs, 64% of them lost their first game. 76 of their opponents, let me repeat that. Of the 25 teams that have played in the playoffs, 64% of them lost their first game. 76% if their opponent had played in it already. So that number went up 12% if they were playing a team that had been there before. And I kind of bumbled through that first one. 13 of the 16 losses in their first appearance were by double digits, and that's 81%. So of those 16 teams that lost, 13 of them lost by double digits. So not only do you not normally win, you normally don't even play well. You're getting beat pretty bad. The average margin of defeat for a Power 4 conference member in their first appearance is 20.5 points per game. The group of 5, 21.5. Almost identical. So we get a little hung up on the names and the logos and don't really dip into the numbers as much. And I know people are going to say, Oregon was playing freaking everybody by the time the James Madison game was over. Yeah, Georgia was when they played Michigan as well. So that doesn't really wash. Only 9 teams won their first appearance, and only 5 of those teams were playing somebody who had played in it before. So 4 of them you had 2 the first year, and then you've had 2 more that were playing somebody, then they were both this year, by the way, that had not played in it before. So I take that back. Penn State did it last year. So you only have 5 that played somebody who had been there before and still won the game. So it's just a big ask. It's learning to win. When you look at the all-time, we talked about what this year looked like as far as the good games, great games, and I consider a great game a one-score game. Anything that is one score, we're going to call a great game. Anything that is within 10 is a really good game. An average game is that kind of 10 to 20 point thing. Anything over 20 points is a blowout. Anything over 30 is a beatdown. So of the 51 playoff games, what does that look like? You've got, let's see, is this right? Okay. Kind of got my numbers screwed up here a little bit. Okay, here we go. For the for the 14 playoffs,